Age of Imprisonment is a fantastic game, and I think it's worth starting with that. And it's definitely a game that any Zelda fan, especially those fond of the Wilds era, should play. But it's a masterwork. The lore-filled book that was exclusive to Japan actually created a lot of issues with the current lore of the Zelda timeline. Yes, this is going to be one of those videos. Some of you will likely get offended by this take. Just remember to stay civil in the comments, please. But I do think it's worth exploring some of the lore issues that arise from both the book and Age of Imprisonment. So, go grab yourself a snack, and remember, it's dangerous to go alone, so subscribe. And let's talk lore holes in Zelda. And bear in mind, there will be spoilers for the entire story and ending sequence of Age of Imprisonment right the way through this video. When we boot the game up for the very first time, we're met with a cutscene of a young Korok travelling throughout the depths. He's clearly quite inquisitive as he spots a shard of metal bathed in a blue light on the floor and picks it up, only for it to rip itself from his hand and fly into the chest cavity of something that sits on a stone tableau before him. The metallic object whirs to life, shocking the young Korok, who stands in disbelief at what stands before him. A humanoid mechanization, seemingly powered entirely by the shard of metal that has embedded itself in its chest. Later in the game, in the cutscene named Schemes in the Shadows, the demon puppet, Phantom Ganon, invades the area in which the construct was found by Kalamo. Now under heavy guard by the Zonai, the Phantom disguises itself as Zelda, which, despite having an odd feeling about, the guards still allow access to. This rolls over into the next cutscene named Fell Puppetry, where she wanders in and spots more of these constructs laying dormant. So utilising its magic, it takes control of one of the remaining mechanizations and destroys the rest of the room, infusing pure dark magic into the core of the automaton. The location this all happens in, according to the in-game map of Age of Imprisonment, is Tobio's Hollow, which ends up being a massively important area for the game, given the fact that it's where these ancient mechanizations have been stored for an incredibly long time, at least according to Mineru, who tells us in the cutscene The Zonai's Folly,
"In our ancestors' time, these constructs were weapons, deadly armaments able to house their Zonai power. But before they knew it, they'd lost control of their creations. The constructs went berserk, bringing a tragic end to Zonai civilization."
So just how does this create a massive loophole within Tears of the Kingdom? Well, the issue here is that within Tears of the Kingdom, this area where the Zonai are found is absolutely nowhere. And I understand it was destroyed by Phantom Ganon, ransacked and then likely buried to hide it away. But not only was this site hidden from the world, it was also built atop of. When we dive into Tobio's Hollow Chasm in Tears of the Kingdom, it is during the Find the Fifth Sage questline. We drop into the chasm and find ourselves in a very strange area, similar to previous Zonai park stations that are dotted across the area, but a lot larger in scale. In the centre of this is a mould of sorts. Once Link brings the head of the creation to this area, he is instructed by the voice of Mineru to bring the parts of the construct back to this mould. Once all of the parts and the owl mask are placed inside of this, the creation comes to life, whirring with a familiar green Zonai energy. This construct and its factory, though, create a small problem within the lore of Age of Imprisonment. In the newer entry, this area just simply does not exist, which means that it was retroactively built to sit atop of the ruins of the old ancient constructs. But if it was retroactively added after the Imprisoning War, as it's inferred by Age of Imprisonment, then Mineru wouldn't have been able to have this area purposely built for her, because she died shortly after the Imprisoning War, sealing her spirit inside of the Purapad, which presents us with our second major continuity problem between the two games. This ending for Mineru is the canonical entry from Tears of the Kingdom. Mineru, according to her in-game dialogue, tells us that before the Gloom's affliction took her life, she became a spirit and entered the Purapad. The gloom's affliction that she speaks of is the remnant of the attack from Ganondorf during the imprisoning war. During this scene, she is seen beaten up, unable to make it to her feet. We know that she makes it out of the imprisoning chamber though, due to the following cutscene, where Zelda lets Mineru know of her intent to break the forbidden rule within the Zonai, and swallow her secret stone, therefore losing herself and becoming a dragon. It's thought to be after this point though when Mineru transfers her spirit into the Purapad, thus effectively ending the Zonai race. But according to Age of Imprisonment, it doesn't exactly play out how we expected. In the final scenes of Age of Imprisonment, we are shown Hyrule Castle built in its current lore-accurate location. At the top of North Hyrule Field, Lenalia is overseeing the pieces being put together on the slabs that depict the storyline of Tears of the Kingdom when Mineru walks in with Zelda, some time clearly removed from the imprisoning war. She walks in here with Zelda, looking fully refreshed, and given what we know about the miasma damage within Tears of the Kingdom and how it heals when the afflicted are subjected to sunlight, or eat a dish made from Sunderlions, it would actually be a relatively safe bet to assume that Mineru is in fact healed from the damage done to her by the miasma. Of course, Mineru could still be ill due to the miasma, but she doesn't indicate that she is at all within this cutscene, meaning that, to some degree, Mineru's ending has been completely changed by this game that we have been told repeatedly is canon to the storyline of Tears of the Kingdom. In this ending for her, Mineru survives the attack within the Chamber of Imprisonment and comes back to Hyrule Castle, which is then rebuilt in North Hyrule Field, atop of said chamber. This was done in order to fortify the seal on Ganondorf, according to Masterworks, and if you want more detail on this, then head over and watch my last video, where I go through 7 key lore details within Masterworks that greatly improve Age of Imprisonment. The general crux of this idea though is that Rauru set up a trap within the imprisoning chamber, fortifying the room with his magic, which then amplifies both his and Zelda's powers over light. What is unbeknownst to the group though is that the trap that Rauru has set is more intended to aid the seal that binds both him and Ganon in place. A stone is put into place at the very foundation of the new Hyrule Castle, sealing Rauru's light magic in, allowing the seal to last until the current era, where Link and Zelda then find Ganondorf and the seal is broken. From here, the construct factory is built atop of where the ancient constructs are found, and Mineru has a potential army of constructs built and then transported to Dragonhead Island. Of course though, we know that this isn't Mineru's ending, which sees her pass away due to injuries caused during the imprisoning war, where, as I stated before, she then transfers her soul to the Purapad, which Zelda then puts inside of a construct for Link to find after he wakes up on the Great Sky Islands. I'm not blind to the fact that Age of Imprisonment is set in the past sequence, and therefore is a prequel of sorts to Tears of the Kingdom, and whenever prequels are made after their eventual sequel, there will always be continuity issues. The makers or developers have to mould the new pieces of media around what was already there, and that doesn't always make for the most interesting story for new fans who will likely want to see something new, not the same old tired cutscenes over and over. That will often come at the cost of continuity. And if it was just this little issue of a whole character's death that breaks continuity between Tears and Age of Imprisonment, this video probably wouldn't have got a script written for it. But there's more. They actually broke their own continuity 4 times in total. I've already spoken at length about 2 of them, Mineru and the Construct Factory. But what about the other 2 continuity issues? Well, let's take a trip to the northern peaks of the map, and head to the North Lomei Labyrinth. In Age of Imprisonment, there are a small handful of missions that make up the most fun gameplay in the entire game. In fact, these sections of gameplay have made Zelda fans, including myself, beg for Koei Tecmo to be given the reins over a new Star Fox game. Seriously, Nintendo, I don't ask much from you, but let this one happen. Let my favourite flying mammals wreck the skies once more, please. Okay, I'll stop begging now. But honestly, these sections are just incredible. You zip through the air, first fighting waves of aerial enemies, apart from in this one where we head through Tobio's Hollow and kill a load of cave dwellers instead, which was a great take on the idea, before being confronted by a big boss. During one of these in particular, during a key part of the storyline, you follow Rauru and his group taking the fight to Ganondorf whilst riding a Mineru-powered Stormwind Arc, while simultaneously launching an attack with the Knight construct. As the Knight construct, you fight through waves of enemies, and there's even these sections where the perspective changes and you're suddenly playing a game of Galaga. It's genuinely great fun. But as you fly around all of the Sky Islands up here, and especially while we're fighting the King Gleeok, something is missing. The North Lomei Labyrinth. The flight path around the map that we take is a little muddy due to the extra Sky Islands that they added in for this flight section. But essentially the plan is that the group are moving the Stormwind Arc from here, into Bantha, to Hyrule Castle, where they intend on confronting Ganondorf and luring him into the trap here in Hyrule Field, where the sealing site lays. So by some form of logic, if we're moving in this general direction from Tabantha, then at the start of our journey, we should be able to see an island the size of North Lomei Labyrinth. But buildings being missing from one time period to another, especially when there's an indeterminable amount of time between them, shouldn't actually present us with issues at all. Apart from when we look at the structure, architecture, and where these labyrinths were built. When we enter these on a ground level, the entryways depict the same dragon statues that are found within the Zonai ruins in Faron. These walls are almost definitely of Zonai design, with markings on the wall like these carved spirals in a square, directly matching markings found on the Zonai Hyrule Castle within Age of Imprisonment. And then there's what is found in the basement of each and every one of these labyrinths. Upon completing the trial within the labyrinth, a grate opens and you drop into the basement of the maze, only to be confronted by a flux construct, which you must defeat before access to a shrine is granted. Constructs are of course a Zonai creation, as are the shrines that are said to be here to help purify evil. So that clarifies that these buildings undoubtedly must have been built by the Zonai. After all, they're the only ones capable of building these in all three locations: the surface, the sky, and the depths. But then that presents us with an issue, very similar in nature to the issue with the Construct Factory. These labyrinths were built around shrines that were placed on these islands, and these shrines, according to both Masterworks and Age of Imprisonment, were created by Rauru, with some being aided in their creation by Sonia. This means that these stone structures either had to have been put up during Raru's reign as king, meaning that they should be in existence well before the Imprisoning War, or they were built after the Zonai era, which means that whoever built them also had godlike powers, or Zonai powers in this instance, and the ability to fly and access to the depths, which we know was only possible from one possible location, within the Yiga hideout. Of course now, we could carry on painting this world, where these are created a long time after the Zonai existed, as an effigy to the Zonai by the Lomei, and that would make sense given the name of these mazes, the Lomei Labyrinths. Many have proposed that the Lomei were a race between the modern era and the Zonai, and likely worshipped or revered the Zonai in some way, shape or form. They housed themselves at the Zonai ruins, and built these labyrinths to honour their gods, and that is a plausible theory, and it would straighten out this continuity error in full, and I would love to be able to move on saying that this is the answer, but there are several flaws with this argument too. The first, like I already said, is that these are built across 3 layers of subterranean, and the Lomei, as far as we know, only had access to one of those. As far as we are aware, they were landbound, hence their decision to live in Faron rather than in the skies. They also had no access to the depths, as the other chasms had not opened, and no other ways into the depths had been left by the Zonai. In fact, to be honest with you, I feel like I'm only calling the barbarians by the name of the Lomei for the sake of convenience. But judging by the fact that these extra layers to these labyrinths exist, and have clearly dropped from the sky during the upheaval, as with all of the other Sky Islands, it would actually appear as if Lomei was just the name given to these structures by the Zonai, and for a good reason. In the original Japanese versions of Tears of the Kingdom, the Lomei labyrinths are known as, and this is a rough translation, the Lomei Labyrinth Castles. Lomei is a direct anagram of Mineru, a word which translates back to labyrinth or maze. These sorts of plays on words happen throughout the game, including the Zonai themselves, which was confirmed by senior lead artist Makoto Yonetsu as being an anagram for the Japanese word for mystery or puzzle. Therefore, I put it to you, and feel free to attack me in the comments for this, that the Lomei were not, and still are not, a separate race, but rather the name Lomei, which is only used for these labyrinthian structures across both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, is a Zonai naming convention and nothing more. The barbarians, as we know, have zero magical ability and are a warlike race that would physically attack enemies based on the attack buffs that their armour would give them, and therefore had no ability to build these mazes, especially in the sky. These structures were likely built by the Zonai, which loops us back directly to the problem in hand. Of course, you can see that the world has changed an awful lot between the past and present, almost paying homage into some degree to the changing landscapes we've seen Hyrule undertake throughout the eons that the games have been depicted. But in this instance, buildings made in this era, you'd expect to be on the map. But incredibly, there isn't even an indication of the labyrinths on the Age of Imprisonment map. I've been hanging on to this one because I actually think it's the biggest continuity problem with Age of Imprisonment and Masterworks. And it's not just Tears of the Kingdom that this one affects. Stick around though, because I think this one has bearings on the whole rest of the timeline, and even possibly on the entirety of the first founding theory. I also need to state that in my video, 7 lore details that improve Age of Imprisonment, this is one of the key pieces of lore that I picked up on. And in this video, I suggested that it's not necessarily something that improves Koei Tecmo's game, but is a cool lore detail that I wanted to capture. But having reread back through and having checked details within Age of Imprisonment, actually the details placed inside of Masterworks do nothing but muddy the lore entirely. So we've been told as far back as 1998 with Ocarina of Time that the Sheikah are a subcategory of Hylian, a tribe or group that operate in the shadows protecting the royal family. In many eras, there are only a small handful, sometimes even only one Sheikah remaining, until Breath of the Wild, when an entire village of Kakariko became home to a large prospering tribe. These Sheikah even started to populate in other areas, with Purah and Robbie taking to Okala, and Joshua and Pyre later on taking to central Hyrule. Their story is actually quite fascinating, and something I intend on visiting properly at a later date, in another video. But essentially the Sheikah have existed as far back as the era of myth. In the beginning, the world was made by 3 goddesses, Din, Varor and Nehru. They formed the Triforce, and placed it in the protection of the goddess Hylia, in order to keep it away from the clutches of evil, as in the wrong hands the full power of the Triforce could be destructive. Hylia, in a losing effort against the powers of evil, rends a chunk of the world up into the sky with her legendary blade. However, in that time period where the goddess battles demise, she also sets forth a plan, in which she sends her most trusted servant to a future incarnation of herself, to bring her back to the past in order to make Link follow and forge the true Master Sword and then defeat demise. That most trusted servant is Impa, and is confirmed by her own dialogue at the end of the game, where she states, Zelda, at the command of the goddess, I passed through the gate of time. I did so to protect you and aid the fight to prevent the world's destruction. She follows this up by stating that the Sheikah are the goddess's chosen guardians, confirming that she is indeed from Hylia's time period. The Sheikah then continue on throughout every branch of the timeline, popping up in many titles, before continuing and expanding their lineage into the era of the Wilds. They are an ever-present within the world of Hyrule, which then presents us with a slight issue when they're omitted from Age of Imprisonment. Throughout the game, there are literally 0 Sheikah, and worse still, there isn't even a reference made to them throughout the entirety of the game. So why is this a problem? Well, it comes down to the timeline positioned by Masterworks, which is then followed up on by Age of Imprisonment. Now, I know and I understand that some of you guys who will comment will say something like, well, the book is only dealing in hypotheticals or suggestion. Or we shouldn't derive lore from the games from this book because it is a lot of filler text that the writers have been paid to write. And I completely understand that criticism. But I actually think that my justification of the use of this book in these lore videos about Age of Imprisonment is valid. My main justification here is that Age of Imprisonment utilises and depicts a lot of what this book has had written in its pages. Age of Imprisonment to me at least felt like an on-air screening of what was being told in the book in many parts. And I fully expected it to be like this. The exorcism pilgrimage, the luring of Ganondorf into the imprisonment chamber, the entire time era that this game takes place in, were all first outlaid in this book. And with Age of Imprisonment following this book as closely as it does for many key parts of the story, with only minor changes being made for theatrics more than anything, calling on this book as reference for what Koei Tecmo and Nintendo were trying to infer seems only fair. The timeline in Masterworks suggests that, as per the rest of the game's timeline, that the Golden Goddesses created the land, and that the goddess Hylia is entrusted with Hyrule to protect, before taking a drastic left turn and telling us that the goddesses give Hylia the secret stones, who then passes them off to the only inhabitants of the land at that time, the Zonai. Which means that in this continuity, the Sheikah do not exist, and are not the goddess's chosen race, and only really come into prominence right near the end of these games' continuity. Through their research, they learn about the Zonai, and create a crest based upon the third eye that prominent Zonai had upon their forehead. They would create a version of this, that those in prominent positions would paint onto their heads or clothing. This eye would represent many things. To the Sheikah most notably, it would pay homage to the gods who ruled this land before them, but also to their own sacrifice throughout aeons of survival in the name of the kingdom. This is confirmed within Masterworks, where in the designer's notes for Rauru this is addressed. The designer's notes read, "By the way, with regards to the connection with the ancient Sheikah tribe, have you noticed the similarity between the Zonai tribe's third eye and the head design of the Sheikah tribe? No, perhaps it is better to say it is the reverse way around." And that is great, apart from one tiny problem. This is Impa. We met her earlier on when we spoke about Skyward Sword, and she has this mark on her face. This mark, according to Masterworks, is inspired by the Zonai, who therefore must have existed at the same time or before the Sheikah, who existed at the same time as the goddess. Yet it was in existence at the same time as or prior to the Zonai, which in turn means that there being no Sheikah in Age of Imprisonment is an issue. So in the vein of the other three continuity errors, how potentially could we fix this? Well, an argument could be put forward for an excerpt from Hyrule Encyclopedia, which states that the symbol is in the shape of an eye, open wide to seek the truth. The Sheikah live as shadows of the royal family and go to any lengths to achieve a goal. Knowing this, the eye on the crest sheds a singular tear. This of course clears up the issue of the eye being inspired by the Zonai, but I often like to think that modern information should always outdate previous texts, and the most modern information that we have is that the Sheikah were indeed inspired by the Zonai. Also, this doesn't help us clear up the issue of the Sheikah just disappearing only to reappear a little further down the line. Okay, so the Sheikah served the goddess. They died out with Impa and her protection of the Triforce in the era of myth, before someone new named Impa restarted and repopulated the tribe based on believing the same core ideals as the original Sheikah. After all, Ganondorf gets resurrected or reborn and comes back as a man or a boar every so many years. Zelda and Link are therefore drafted into that cycle and also get reborn, so it's not actually outside of the realm of possibility. That would then therefore allow the godly era to take place directly after Skyward Sword, with the tribe then coming back into relevance in various games until they finally materialise here, in Breath of the Wild, having grown in number. The answer though, along with so much of the rest of Masterworks, actually points incredulously towards the true founding theory being where Masterworks and therefore Age of Imprisonment lean towards in terms of where this game actually fits in the timeline. it points less and less towards these games being sat in their own timeline at the end of the series, and more towards them bookending the entire timeline, with Age of Imprisonment and the Godly Era taking place just after Skyward Sword, and the two Wilds games in the present taking place right at the very end of the timeline. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to watch this video. And if you spotted any other inconsistencies with Age of Imprisonment and the rest of the Wilds Era games, or maybe you just didn't see any issues in game, let me know in the comments below. And lastly, remember, it's dangerous to go alone, so subscribe. I'll see you next time.